I hope you've like put down the scratch platform now to focus on the presentation. So I've tried to bring insights on what young people and children are kind of thinking about, how are they articulating life skills, 21st century skills, and I'm sure a lot of you will also have to contribute given your own experiences of having worked with young people. So looking forward to hearing some of those as well. So I think the first one for me has been that there's a lot of evolution in just how life skills, 21st century skills, and now we're talking about future skills. While it seems that the future is already here, I think things which we were talking about like 10 years back in terms of what technology will do or climate change, we're experiencing it here. So I think with that shifting trends, how we're articulating life skills, 21st century skills, all of that has also been evolving. So if you look at it, it started in like 1999, which was the first time, and interestingly, it was the World Health Organization which had kind of articulated the first definitions and frameworks of life skills. And then we had P21, which was around for the longest time to build an understanding of what life skills needs to be about. A lot of it had started with self-awareness and kind of the focus on mental well-being and sort of overall development of the child. Then it moved to include aspects like media, technology, information assessment, assimilation, and all of those kinds of things. And then in 2005, when OECD was coming up with a framework, a lot of conversations again around bringing in a more innovation-related thought process. There was a lot of conversation which came in with OECD about ethical responsibility. How are we, taking accountability of our actions at an individual level? How is it impacting society around us? And then eventually in India also, I think in 2020, CBSE tried to kind of, consolidate all of this into a handbook of 21st century skills, which kind of influenced a lot of conversation within the state education ecosystems. And this is the latest articulation of skills for the future, which is coming from the World Economic Forum, where again, I think like they've interestingly looked at it from two aspects, that one is the content of what gets transacted, and the other is the kind of experiences that we create from a learning point of view. So global citizenship skills, again, innovation, creativity, technology skills. Some of these actually also now talk about climate literacy a lot more because of the climate change that we are seeing. And if you look at experiences, a lot of it is around personalized learning, self-paced learning, inclusive learning. I think the focus on equity has been getting strengthened over the last decade or so. Problem-based and collaborative learning, that how do we move away from more competitive frames of learning to more collaborative frames of learning, and lifelong and student-driven learning as well. But where are our learners when it comes to their understanding and practice? So this is a survey that was done as part of the Life Skills Collaborative a couple of years back. So you can see that which are the skills. So while the world is moving to all of these skills, in terms of what are the future oriented skills that we need, this is where currently our young people are. That which are the most known skills: curiosity, decision making, responsibility, self-esteem, and less understood are adaptability, agency, analytical thinking, conflict resolution, critical thinking, resourcefulness. But if you look at some of these things at the bottom, that even though they know decision making, 77% students feel less than confident in sharing opinions in front of others. Right? So they might have an articulation of it, but they're still not being able to put it into practice. Or the last one, that 75% students feel that they can make decisions about their studies as opposed to decisions around friends or marriage. So I can decide like more transactional things in terms of choice of subjects, but when it comes to more fundamental life decisions which actually reflect maybe my how I think about others, how I relate with others, friendship, marriage, those are still being influenced by adults around my life. And I think for me the most stark one was this one. The 59% students believe that people are born with talent and abilities which are fixed and immutable. So even though we are working with young people on all these life skills, they are growing up with limiting beliefs about themselves. And this was a quote that I had heard from a girl in Jharkhand, where she was talking about basically like somehow the conversation came about how smart do you think you are, and she's like, मेरा भाई मुझसे बहुत ज़्यादा smart है. And I was like, कि क्यों आपका भाई आपसे ज़्यादा smart है? क्योंकि वो बाहर जाकर मार्केट का काम कर सकता है, उसको गाड़ी चलानी आती है, तो कैलकुलेशन सब कर सकते हैं. हमारे में तो उतनी बुद्धि नहीं है, तो हम उतने स्मार्ट नहीं हैं. But she was doing a lot of other things at home in terms of managing the household, cooking, which requires a lot of life skills, but she is not considering that as intelligence. So I think like it's important to keep front and center how young people are experiencing some of these things and what are their own perceptions about themselves as well. And after that, of course, our teachers, a lot of conversations have been happening about teachers since yesterday and how what teachers believe also gets passed on to our learners. So this was another survey that we had done with teachers in Gujarat, Odisha and Telangana, I think. And we asked them, this was more in the context of STEM, but we kind of equated it with 21st century skills to understand that, which are the skills that you're trying to teach when you're teaching science or maths. Which one do you think was the highest scored in this? From the 4 here. Huh? Thinking logically. And which one do you think was the lowest scored? Great. So we are in tune with how our teachers are also thinking as well. And I think it's important that it's a connection, right? That if you are not teaching young people how to question traditional beliefs, maybe that's one of the reasons why they are also growing up with limiting beliefs about themselves, about gender, about caste, religion, all of those things. So I think for us, I think one of the reflections has been that it's useful to keep having these kinds of conversations and do a pulse check, because it also, while we can do all the assessments, project related assessments and evaluations, I think these are the kind of research insights which tell us what is actually happening and what are teachers and learners actually taking away from that experience that we are trying to create. And like I said, the other sort of reflection for us has been that social identities play out a lot in how life skills or 21st century skills are also experienced and imbibed by our learners. And again, another research kind of pointed out that how definitions of life skills will change depending on who you are engaging with. So the whole idea of resilience could be understood very differently from someone who comes from an experience of violence to someone who's trying to navigate, say, a career decision, to someone who has been in other kinds of adverse situations. But are we mindful of this when we are again designing our learning experiences, that when we are saying decision making, what would decision making mean for that young girl or that young boy whom we are working with, or someone from another gender? As well. And therefore, I think this whole idea of universal design of learning, it comes under many different names, but how do we make pedagogy as culturally relevant as possible and take that this variability is always going to be a given in our classroom. And how do we account for that variability, and how do we design a curriculum which addresses that variability rather than saying that how do I try and standardize it as much as possible. I think another thing which has been interesting for us is just how are we looking at some of these emerging trends, so whether it's technology, whether it's climate change, how do we now bring it into our learning experiences through more project-based learning. So hackathons, I'm sure a lot of people have spoken about how hackathons are the new way of sort of engaging with learners and giving them a direct exposure of real life context, problem solving skills. But again, I think what was interesting for us was that when students went through the whole journey of a hackathon, and for many of them it was the first time that they were going through this hackathon experience, how identities were shifting. So the first time when they came in, they were scared, anxious, hesitant, but there was also curiosity to learn more about what's going to happen. So I think just the emotional state and how they were again perceiving themselves. As they moved through the hackathon journey, they started becoming a little bit more confident about themselves as they engaged with technology as well. You ask them, what's your superpower? What do you think you can solve for? all of those kind of help them move out of their comfort zone. But again, as you give them more conceptual inputs to start working with technology, and we've introduced AI and all of that with our learners as well, again there's a feeling of overwhelm, feeling like this is too much for me, this is too new for me, whether I'll be able to do it or not. And then we come to problem identification, to again having doubts, whether I'll be able to identify something which I'll be able to solve for. And the tendency is to really go for like these very high level problems, right? Like cleanliness is a problem in my area, or pollution is a big issue in my area. But how do we get them to like think about really specific things which they can work on, was another sort of insight for us. And so by the time they move towards building their solutions, there's an identity shift where they start talking about themselves as creators and inventors as well. And while introducing them to emerging technology, I think like it shifts how again they start looking at themselves. And I feel like there's a lot of sort of research insights sitting for us on the kind of projects that students are making, and what they're again telling, what that is telling us about how our learners are thinking and perceiving the world. So I'll give you like three examples of hackathon projects that students had made, which has like stayed with me. So there was this one boy in Odisha who had made a slipper, and the slipper was something which it was for women, as a safety tool for women to protect them from sexual harassment in public spaces. If someone will come near them, the slipper will give a current. And they said that we can increase the voltage of this current as well, ताकि बहुत जोर का झटका भी लग सकता है और फिर वो लोग डर के भाग जाएंगे. I was like, but अगर वो public space में है lady, तो she can ask for help, कोई उनकी मदद करने तो आ ही सकता है. He's like, नहीं, आजकल मदद करने कोई नहीं आता है, हम सबको अपने बारे में सोचना है. So that for me, I think, was a moment where what is this young boy thinking about the world that we are living in, and the kind of relationships they are perceiving, and what are the trust levels that they are growing up with in their own sort of society. So that's one example that stayed with me. Another one was a student, and this was a group of girls in Andhra Pradesh, where they wanted to build a solution which, so they had a lot of fields. And to protect the fields from animals, the farmers had put like these electrical wires, barbs, right? So if an animal is trying to cross over, they'll again get an electric shock, and the animals most probably die most of the time. So they wanted to solve for that how can we come up with a solution where the animals don't have to die, but at the same time the fields shouldn't get sort of spoilt because animals are coming in. So then they came up with some sensor kind of a thing which will send an alarm to the field owner when the animals are coming in. But again, I think how are they understanding their relationship with the larger environment around them, the sensitivity that they are kind of demonstrating towards other sort of living beings was interesting to note in that. So I feel like there's a lot more potential to do research on the kind of projects that students are making and what that is telling us about their ways of thinking and ways of being. Was something that I thought was interesting to just understand more about young people. Internships, this slide is empty because I feel like there's a lot more potential to do more in this area, but it's not something that we have explored enough. I feel even as civil society organizations, while CSRs are kind of opening up a lot of these opportunities maybe for higher grades, but can we think of something like from maybe 11, 12 standard onwards to provide again more real world exposure. So hopefully this slide will have more insights to offer maybe 2-3 years from now as we think about building some of this into our design of working with young people as well. This again has been an interesting one in terms of influence of social media. So what we are sort of seeing with young people is that one, access definitely is differentiated at this point in time, but wherever there is access, people are using social media for many different things, right? So what emerged is that this is a young boy from an ITI in Assam who said that, I have learned everything about being an electrician from my relative. I'm only going to an ITI to get a certificate, and my real learning in terms of what newer trends are emerging in this space is happening from YouTube. We had a boy again in Odisha who had started his own YouTube channel around gaming solutions, like cheat codes for gaming. And he's like, you know what, $50 has just been transferred to my account because it got a certain number of views because of the challenge that the solution that I put out. So I think students are already exploring a lot of these things and it's influencing their aspirations as well. So what is important, I think, again, going back to the future skills, right, like self-directed learning, how are we building those behaviors that they use these technologies more intentionally? Who is guiding them in terms of the plethora of information that is available there, and how do they decide for themselves which is the right information? I think those kinds of skills are definitely becoming more important. And again, I think, like, since many of us here are also working on career exploration, right? Like, kids also know what are the politically correct answers. So this was a girl in an 8th grade who was asked ki, you know, what do you want to become? And she's like, मैं सच बोलूँ कि झूठ बोलूँ. तो झूठ वाला आंसर है कि I want to become an engineer, but सच वाला आंसर ये है that I want to become an influencer. Also because she thought that she's great at singing. So again, she is, you know, going on to YouTube to learn sort of the tricks and traits of singing, and that's what she wants to really become, like make reels and make money out of that and become famous. But again, you can see there are a lot of sort of gender variations in terms of the social media access and all of that that is getting influenced. So I feel like, again, this has been an insight for us that when we're working with young people on career exploration, are we really understanding what their real and true aspirations are, and are we being able to open pathways which will help them move towards those aspirations as well. The other one, and I think Quest does a lot of work in edtech, so this one is really kind of important for us, is just how there is so much variety coming in the kind of learning tools that are now available for our learners, right? And we are competing with your mainstream tools. So these are some of the things that are out there right now. A lot of chatbots. I think ever since WhatsApp kind of opened it up, a lot of experimentation is happening there. I think we're yet to see how effective it is from a learning point of view, but it does give you direct access to the learner. And if you're able to create learning experiences which are engaging enough, which are relevant enough, I think those are now challenges from a learning experience design point of view, that, you know, how do we hold attention, how do we make it interesting enough, how do we make learning relevant. So there's a chatbot which is teaching computational thinking, which we are experimenting with right now. There's a chatbot by another organization which is focusing on mental well-being for young people. There's a chatbot which has been started by UNICEF and Yuva, which is around making children learn life skills as well. Then there are games which are out there. So again, Career Quest is a game that we came up with to give students an experience of career decision making as they navigate their career dilemma. So it has 8 characters from different parts of the country. But we got a lot of feedback on this game when the learners played this game. Ek to they were like, isme na game type feeling nahi aa rahi hai. Because they are like used to playing their mainstream games and all of that. So they are like, isko thoda, you know, you'll have to change a lot of that. There's Go Nisha Go by another organization which helps girls and boys as well navigate sort of gender norms and again puts them in situations around that. This was another game which we saw at MIT being developed again on mental well-being. Again, I think an interesting insight here is that what are the values on which we are basing the design on some of these edtech tools. An interesting thing that we heard about this Guardian's Paradise Island was that generally, like when you are using technology, it can be a very isolating experience, right? But how do you use technology to build community? How do you use technology to kind of have shared goals, shared accountability? Can we build that into the design of our edtech products? Becomes very, very important. This, from a learning purpose, I think like Khan Academy has also been experimenting with a chatbot. But I think what is interesting here is that it doesn't give the answers correctly. So again, if we are really serious about building critical thinking skills, then how are our learning experiences, including our edtech learning tools, also enabling all of that becomes important to kind of think about. And with this, I think the shifting role of adults. Parents definitely have to have a more supervisory role as well. They also need to be able to give access to digital devices to learners as well. And the role of teachers as well. Again, this is something that I heard from one of the visits in Karnataka, where a teacher was like that, you know, class mein smart board aa gaye hain, lekin hum smart nahi hue hain abhi tak. So I think like what is technology doing to perceptions that teachers have about themselves also becomes important. And are they feeling empowered or are they feeling disempowered as a result of that is something to be mindful of. Another interesting thing that we had kind of seen was when we had done a research after a teacher education program was most of our indicators saw a shift. We saw a shift in teaching learning practices, we saw a shift in changing gender perceptions of teachers, but there was one area in which we did not see a shift. Can you guess what that was? From teachers' perspectives. Self-learning, using technology for their own self-learning. We did not see any shift in that even after 2 years of intervention time, which was an interesting reflection for us that they are using technology to learn because we had a blended learning program. But at the same time, somehow it's not being internalized that I'm doing it, but it's still not coming into their vocabulary and articulation. So that I thought was interesting. The other, I think, and this is also coming from the UNGA Summit of the Future, everybody's been kind of talking about where are we headed in the future. So I think one of the things that we have been starting to work with is this whole idea of futures thinking and how are young people imagining their futures. So if I ask you to give me like one word that comes to your mind when I say, how is the world going to look in 2045? What feeling, what emotion? Just give me one word that comes to your mind. When I say what is the world going to be like in 2045?
Weird.
Huh? Weird. Weird, okay.
More artificial, less natural.
More artificial, less natural, okay. What else? So AI and therefore soft skills.
So if we look at the future, so even there is hidden living, that is I call as a coding. So what will be missing that time? That is coding.
Okay. So not a very optimistic view of the future. It's basically we are heading towards doomsday. So we asked young people also what are they thinking about the future, and these are, by the way, AI generated images of the future imagination of young people. So this one is from Assam, where young people were like that, you know what, our city is not going to exist, it's going to be flooded, our city is going to become a river. This one's from Odisha, where they're like, you know, there's so much mining and so much extraction that is going to happen that our state is going to become unlivable, we'll not be able to breathe, quality of air would be very, very harmful. And that's Gujarat, where the kids were like that there's going to be a drought, you know, there's going to be conflict because of water. So basically not a very, very hopeful view of the future is what our young people are growing up with today. But then we asked them that forget all of that, right? If you had to imagine a future given all of these constraints as well, and if you would really want something to happen, then what is the kind of future that you would imagine? So, you know, like just let go of all the barriers that you are thinking about today. And this is what they came up with. So this is Assam, where they said that there will be flood tourism, there'll be floating houses that will be there. You know, the notions of school will change. You will learn from where you are at. Maybe the school will come to your house and collect you because it will be a floating school, and we will learn in that. This was Assam, Orissa, where they said that, you know, maybe the norms of reservation will change in the future. With so much technology that is coming about, we'll have 60% of seats reserved for humans, and that will become the norm. And there'll be new roles which will open up, like a chief plough manager for the Odisha state government. And we will, you know, put a carbon tax on all non-essential items so that we make money also and we reduce like these consumption habits for people as well. And this is Gujarat, where they said that, you know, there'll be a water bank and there'll be a committee which will be governing access to water for the water bank, and the committee will have people from all castes, all religion, so that there's equitable distribution of water. and there's no discrimination in the future when it comes to access to sort of, basic resources. So I think for us, the idea is to broaden the whole imagination that young people have of the future, to really give them hope that there is still time to change the future that we are moving towards. You don't have to be passive recipients of the future. You can work actively towards changing the future, because the future does not exist, right? And the future can have multiple possibilities because it only exists in our imagination. But right now we have this one view of the future which is being determined by our lived reality today. But if we have to break the shackles, I think, which Prashant was also saying, of deficit, of limited imagination, then can we expand our imagination of the future from what seems to be the most probable future to move towards more preferable futures? And how do we now work with young people to first expand and have an articulation of preferable futures, and then work towards building some of those preferable futures as well? And I think the last one for me is from moving from youth-centric to youth-led. Youth-centric is what I think many of us are right now, where we are trying to understand who these young people are, what their personas are, and how do we design for them, or at the most design with them, the co-designing part. But youth-led is really young people in decision-making spaces. What are they thinking? What is the change that they want to bring? And how do we go about making this happen? So I just want to leave you with this question, which is more inward-facing, that how many of us have young people who are really in decision-making spaces, who are really influencing change, and are we really putting them in the driver's seat, or again, the kind of relationship we have is a little bit more patronizing, that we will work towards your improvement, and we'll understand you better and give you something that you want, versus really working with them on what they really want. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. And we can take some questions, or? Okay.
Just one small request, while asking the question, just switch on your mic, please.
Her and then you, yeah?
Okay, so that's one slide where you mentioned about the key barriers of women
This is a good way to recap the entire presentation also. This one? Yeah.
Can you, you are here talking about social media and basically the media influence as well. And if I remember, there was also an ad by Samsung where there's this one girl and the family is against the girl, pursuing ITI, and then when there's a marriage happening and the generator shuts down and she fixes it, so it just becomes like a whole thing. So what are your views on media usage on that, and especially if you can elaborate more on the key barrier that you're looking at?
Yeah. So I think that's a good example. I feel like social media definitely can play a more sort of important role in shifting some of these perceptions. What we have also seen in our own work is that when we do some of these role model interactions where we invite parents as well, that sometimes is a big shift that happens in their perceptions about just what is happening in the world outside. And interestingly, when we started doing role model interactions, especially from a gender perspective, for us the intention was that this will be a way for girls and boys to get more information about career pathways, right? कि आपको engineering करनी है या कुछ और करना है, तो आप how will you go about navigating that pathway? But the kind of questions that the kids were asking were so different. Like from girls, the questions that were coming were that how did you convince your parents to let you go out and study, right? How did you convince your parents to not get you married after you were done studying? Which we had not anticipated कि इस तरह के सवाल भी होंगे. So I feel like the social media therefore can play a role in one, just bringing out these stories, which are real life stories as well. To change and provide alternatives. Again, I think like move away from probable futures to show more sort of preferred futures as well. And this one, I think the barrier here that we're talking about is that, which is what I was saying, right? Like while there's access to internet, it's not being used very intentionally from a learning point of view. And especially for women, like they don't know. So even in an ITI, if you go, women's enrollment in ITIs is very low. One, that they don't know that something like that exists. They don't know how to search for relevant courses in ITIs as well. And once they are into a course as well, what after that, those are the areas which need a lot more work. So it's not so much that we have to give them the information. Now we have to work with them on how do you navigate through this information, right? And how do you, so if you have the phone even for half an hour, what are you going to use that phone for? You know, are you going to go on YouTube and, you know, use it for entertainment and Korean drama is really, really popular amongst all states and all kids. So are you going to use it for that, or are you going to use it for a more intentional search that you can do, say, from a future pathway point of view? So that is where this barrier was coming from.